everybody, and thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much, XR Wandsworth, for organizing this. And we are very lucky tonight to have Mark Campanale with us. Mark has worked for over 20 years in green finance and made the first renewable energy investment over 30 years ago. A geothermal energy company in California, right? And Mark is also the founder of Carbon Tracker, an independent think tank that carries out in-depth analysis on the impact of the energy transition on capital markets and fossil fuel investments. Carbon Tracker Analytics helped launch the divestment movement with Bill McKibben and 350.org. I'm Claude from Money Rebellion. We seek to expose the root causes of the climate emergency through campaigning, direct action, and sharing expertise, like tonight. The economic system governs all that matters to us, and at the moment, under the rules of neoliberalism, it is willing to sacrifice everything for the benefit of a few. So just in terms of how the talk will work, because we are recording the talk to put it on the on YouTube and on social media later. If you have any questions, please keep them for the end. We won't interrupt, but there will be plenty of time to ask questions at the end. So I think that's it. I'll leave you the floor.
Thank you for this kind introduction. I was exchanging WhatsApp with Ali, one of the nurses who was prosecuted for smashing JP Morgan's windows, or was it Barclays as well? Maybe it was all the banks' windows. And I was trying to figure out what is it that we don't like about JP Morgan, one of the biggest banks in the world, and the continuing funding of the fossil fuel industry. I had to think about it for a little bit, and I don't think the bankers at JP Morgan love fossil fuels. I think what they love about it, they love the business model of fossil fuels. So if you think about it for a minute, you're a bank. You're making fees for lending Shell money or BP money. You're making fees from doing project finance. They want to do a new project in the North Sea. You're making fees from constructing the huge engineering equipment for extracting the oil. And you're making fees from leasing the ships that carry the oil from one side of the world to the other. And you're making fees every time they issue debt on the London stock market, bonds or equity. They're making placement fees. And then they make fees from lending to the hedge funds for trading in the oil and gas companies. And then JP Morgan and the other banks make fees from prime brokerage with their hedge funds. And then they make fees all the way through the fossil fuel system. And then when Darren Woods, the CEO of Exxon, is a big guy, if you've ever met him, who takes home, $100 million a year, they put it in JP Morgan Private Bank. And they make fees from the millions made by the people in the fossil fuel system. Now let's think about wind and air. What can they charge for sunlight? And what can they charge for wind? They can't charge a thing. And once you've built a wind turbine, maybe you'll raise a little bit more money to maintain it. But that's it. That's it. So what are the banks doing? They're not defending the fossil fuel companies. They're defending the most profitable banking arrangement that exists in the world, which is our global dependency on the fossil fuel system. They're defending a business model, and it's a completely rational thing to do, because they will make money every single day from trading and selling oil and gas. And that really is a problem that I want to talk about today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, how did I end up doing what I do, and I'm going to talk a little bit about London, the financial centre, along with New York, of the global fossil fuel financial system. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the clean energy system. Now, some of you, if you looked at the screen, you've figured out what is one of my favourite films. I think probably a lot of you have seen The Matrix, and there's a great line in it, in The Matrix. You hear that, Mr. Anderson? That is the sound of inevitability. Because what we know is true, that whatever's happening in this climate crisis, the world is coming off of fossil fuels. We're building an amazing clean energy system, and I want to talk about the speed of that, what it means for those of us that are involved in finance. So we've got this rather dystopian set of choices. It's not like we don't know what those choices are. We've got a choice between continuing the system that we've got now, which is heading us very, very quickly to climate catastrophe, or we've got this rather sort of lovely world on the right, which is a matter of choices. And people say that money is amoral. Actually, it's not. Every time an investor makes a decision, or some of you who have influence over, you might have a personal pension, a bank account, everybody is making a moral decision. I worked in finance for 20, 25 years. A guy came in, he came in with his deck to clear a forest in Guyana, and the investors sat around, and I went to another event at the Savoy, which was clearing the forests of Indonesia for palm oil. People are making moral decisions. It's not like, oh, I didn't know, it's, oh, we didn't think. People are making moral decisions. And so very early in my life, I thought the choice I had was I trained as an agricultural economist, I was going to work, I was interested in the global south and what I could do as an economist to bring development. And my first job was working with the African Coffee Company in Mosul. That became a company called Cafe Direct, which is still around. And I worked with them on the coffee supply side. And then for one reason or another, I ended up leaving that world. I'm working with Band-Aid Live. My first job was working with Band-Aid Live Aid, if you remember them, 1985, 86, 87. And I lived and worked out in East and West Africa. And I went from that into the world of green finance. And so the next slide, thank you. There we go, there's me as a young analyst. I was one of the founders of, one of the founders of the Ecology Funds business, which was the first green fund 35 years ago. And we worked in St. James's, there were 4 or 5 of us, and I remember we did our first little adverts. Some guy coming off the street off his motorbike with his 30 grand check, he said, I've made some money, I want to invest it ethically. And it made me actually think, okay, we could have this kind of model of philanthropy and donations, but we can actually build a whole new financial system where the money that's in the global north can go to pro-poor sustainable developments. But let's change the way the city works. And there's the old saying about why do people go to banks to rob, is because that's where the money is. If you want to change capitalism, I'm one of these people who believe that you have to take control of the capital. So I headed to the City of London and worked with 3 or 4 other people, setting this up. Can I go on to the next slide? And then ended up, ended up there, before my hair went grey, ended up with this team, and we actually raised about 2 billion. So I was one of the people, we ran Friends of the Earth pension scheme and Greenpeace's pension scheme. We also ran the Bible Society of Scotland pension scheme. So it was quite a range of different strategies that we ran on. And then after that, I left after doing that because, of course, and I did my first geothermal energy deal. I did recycling deals. My team 30 years ago, we turned away, I remember, it was pretty certain it was Rachel's Dairy or the organic food company. Who the hell's going to buy organic yogurt? We turned that one away until we realised it ended up in every sort of store on the high street. So investing was about picking companies and avoiding the really bad stuff. But what I saw, I used to go down to the library and I used to work in the Broadgate development in the city, and I used to read all these prospectuses, and these big coal companies were raising money in the City of London, and these big oil companies. I picked up one of them. This was a company called Extrata, 2001, 23 years ago now, and it was a coal company, and in the prospectus, which ran to 300 pages, and I did read all of it, all it did was coal, it only mentioned climate change in passing. There was only 10 lines on climate change as a coal company. I thought, well, we're financing this madness, this idiocy. How many coal companies are there listed on the London stock market, and oil companies? And what would happen if they were to burn all the reserves that they got? And that's led to this idea of the carbon model. Can we go into the next one? Look, you know this stuff. It's all the emissions in the atmosphere have gone up in the last 70 years. We've gone from 350 parts per million, we're over at 420, somebody will tell me the exact, and it's the cumulative amount of emissions. So if it's the cumulative amount of emissions, it's the CO2 in the reserves of Shell. It's why we're stopping the companies from developing new oil and gas, is because we've got to stop the world financing the next round of fossil fuel projects. And this is the statistic which I honestly didn't know, was Shell responsible for 1% of the world's future emissions? 2%? What about the top 20? What about Exxon and BP? What about the top 200? Okay, let's take the world's top 200 coal, oil and gas companies. How much CO2 is in their reserves? If it's been financed by the banks and the pension funds, it's another way of saying that they think this stuff is going to come out of the ground. If they're financing more, that's the most important indicator of where we're going to end up with in 10 years' time in terms of global warming. So express this in terms of the carbon budget. I reckon that we're through 1.5 degrees now. We're at 1.5 degrees now. Pretty certain we're through it. But so the scientists who still hopeful think that the carbon budget to 1.5 degrees is around 280 gigatons. We emit 41 gigatons. It's a range, maybe it's 50 gigatons a year. You can see the maths. That's why we're down to the last couple of years. 2 degrees, it's around 1,000 gigatons. And so 1.5, well, it's not 7 years, it's 6 years. I think it's now. So you can see what we're trying to do here. It's let's stack up all the reserves of Exxon and Shell and BP. Let's think of what that will be. Of course, these are the biggest companies in people's pension funds. Shell and BP are the two biggest companies typically, along with the banks like HSBC, and everyone in the UK's pension funds. That's why it's so important, please. Right, so what was the analysis that became the carbon bubble? Well, I took the top 200 and we said, okay, so it's oil, it's coal, and it's gas. And each one of these is a financial centre. That actually is New York, but it wouldn't fit, and that's Toronto, and that's Joburg, and Shanghai's in there, and then you've got Australia. So if you think of climate change as a capital markets problem, there's only two places in the world that count. One is New York, and the other is London. And most of the world's unburnable fossil fuel reserves are in those two financial centres. 15%, you hear the statistic that UK is only 1% of the world's emissions. But when you think about the world's fossil fuels, where 15% of the world's fossil fuels reserves owned by private companies are listed on the London Stock Exchange. That's why London is so important to this narrative. Don't let any politician convince you otherwise. We don't hear about it. That's why the work Extinction Rebellion is doing to make this aware is so crucial. So we did it stock market by stock market. And then we suddenly realised that if we could get pension funds out in the UK and pension funds out in the US, we can start to undermine the ability of the fossil fuel companies to finance themselves. Get the pension funds off the insurance companies. Everyone will have an insurance policy, a life insurance policy maybe, a car insurance policy. That makes you a stakeholder, whether it's Norwich Union or the Prudential or Legal in General. Everyone has a vote in this consumer voice. Please. Next. Now, I'm going to tell you this now. So John Lennon had this old joke that life is what happens when you're planning to do other things. I was doing something else. I wasn't launching an organisation. I was answering a question. How much CO2 is in the reserves of the world's top 200 companies? And we published 100 copies of our report. We didn't have a website. We didn't have any staff. We only had minimal funding. And we published this report here. Somebody gave this report to Naomi Klein, who's a writer in America, and she gave it to an American called Bill McKibben, who's another writer, and he wrote this article in Rolling Stone magazine. So it was around then that we met, wasn't it, Caroline? And he wrote this article, Global Warming's Terrifying New Math. The simple numbers add up to global catastrophe, and that made clear who the real enemy is. It's an easy and powerful bit of arithmetical analysis, first published by analysts in the UK, as we're making around upends most of the conventional political thinking about climate change, allows us to understand the precarious position in simple numbers. Good old Bill. And I went out to America to the launch of his Do the Math Tour, which was a phrase taken from the chapter, one of the chapters of our report. And he launched something that wasn't in the report. He said, let's divest the world of fossil fuels. We wrote a very technical thing. Let's change the regulatory rules, the listing rules, this, that, and the other. He said, no, we need a global movement led by students and activists to get out of fossil fuels, starting with places like Yale and Harvard, and obviously came to Oxford and Cambridge, and launched this divestment movement. So just to pick up about why was this point he was making in the article, why is this so important, is there's the remaining carbon budget here for different degrees of warming. This is the the listed reserves, which is sort of the rest of the same. And these are the proved reserves, including, this is what the world knows we've got, coal, oil and gas. And that's why it's a carbon bubble, 5 times the remaining carbon budget. Anyway, so next one. I think you've got this point. And what are the oil fossil fuel companies, the oil companies doing? This is what I'm dealing with, or this is what I was dealing with as an analyst in the city, and even now, doing the tours of all the world's big pension funds and insurance companies, which is what my team colleagues do. They're all forecasting massive growth in the demand for oil and gas. This is what we're battling an ideological commitment to more of the same, even they know that this is leading to climate catastrophe. So I went off to New York, and that's a carbon bubble being pushed down Wall Street. So I'll go on to the next one. And I think, there we go. And then it gets burst on the horns of the bull in Wall Street. Anyway, so after I went to that, it made me realise suddenly there's something bigger here. It's just an idea, it just hadn't. So I created Carbon Tracker with some friends, and we ended up having staff, and now we've got 40 people who are working there now. And then amazingly, with the divestment campaign, faith groups, the folks looking after the money of these elderly nuns in New York were going to Goldman's and these endowments in Cambridge, and I did these presentations at these Cambridge colleges, were going to their fund managers saying, what's going on, why are we investing in this? And then the big asset managers like JP Morgan, I presented there a number of times, and Goldman Sachs, and presented there, and saying, can you please tell us what this issue is, because we're getting all our clients asking us. And this is a story from the Financial Times, which is the original carbon bubble from Carbon Tracker. This is an anti-fracking protester, and people like BlackRock, they launched a fund. We needed to do a lot more, but then the carbon bubble drives the debate, and then suddenly realised that actually there's a little bit more going on here. We can drive this as an idea. It's not the only idea, but we can drive this as an idea. And that launched really from, then can I just press it once more? Okay, and once more. Thanks, Julia. So I read this just a short while after it came out. Unusable reserves, hot air, said analysts. A recent report by Carbon Tracker argues most of the world's stock of hydrocarbons can never be burnt if we were to avoid runaway climate change. Has been met with widespread scepticism. And then in comes the movement, in comes the students, in comes the activists, in comes the nuns protesting. It's always nuns and not the others, not the guys. But anyway, so and then 4 years later, all the recent ideas campaigners come up with to convince the world to do more to curb global warming, none were more potent as the concept of stranded fossil fuel assets. And this story became a meme. Next. Okay, so what actually happened? I picked up a Goldman Sachs study last year that appeared in Forbes magazine that said 10 years on, because of the activists protesting, the world's reserves of oil and gas have gone from 50 years to 23 years. So we've roughly halved it. And why is there so much protest about the North Sea? You probably don't know this. Based on the reserves of the oil companies, we're down to the last 6 to 8 years of reserves. I mean, the Middle East has got 40 to 50 to 60 years, 80 years of proven reserves. But the key thing is that it's had an effect. Movements working together, people with the right information, people mobilising together, whether you're a pension fund, Quaker groups getting your church out, the United Reformed Church just passing their own resolutions to divest all their endowments and reserves of fossil fuels. It's had an effect. So I said that I was going to sort of switch. That's been my story. That's how Carbon Tracker came about. We're just a tiny cog in a massive wheel. But I actually want to move and talk about what is this new system that will inevitably lead to the demise of the fossil fuel system. And that's what I want to talk about now, please. So, during London Climate Action Week, a lot more has been taught now about the effect of tipping points. So 2001, we thought 4 to 5 degrees we were going to manage. By 2007, we were realising actually 2 to 3 degrees. 2013 with these next IPCC reports, well, was 2 degrees manageable? And what we're beginning to realise now, there's another one coming out, that actually the most dangerous tipping points that we're going to see now between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees, the close down of the AMOC, which circulates warm water up into the Arctic and keeps Europe warm. All these things are happening. But against the background of that, all of the forecasts that people have been using, this is the World Energy Outlook from the International Energy Agency, have always underpredicted the actual installation of new solar. Particularly, there's been the most successful story. So the source of optimism is that we're installing this cheap new energy source, renewable energy, which gives us some hope that we're within range, some hope that we're within range of avoiding 2 degrees. I think we may go to 2 degrees. I hope that we don't, because we know it will be devastating effects. And it's going to be technology transformation that will end the fossil fuel system. Investors are waking up to the biggest investment opportunity in the history of the world. In economics, things take longer to happen than you think they will, and then they happen far faster than they thought that you could. And I think this is what we're seeing now, Tulia. It was even yesterday, I think it was Radio 4, was saying how Norway's had 2 hours of completely free energy because the vast abundance of cheap renewable energy. And California, the 7th largest economy in the world, is having 4 or 5 hours a day without using fossil fuels at all. This is what we're building. And capital from people's pension funds was poured into the clean technology-related investments. We got to the first billion just 4 years ago. We're now getting up towards the second billion, trillion rather, not billion, second trillion, and growing from there. So the point I'm making is that with these new technologies, the shifts are happening. So let's go into something. What is the cause of this? Sorry if you can't see from there. Let me just see how bad this is. Can you see this? That's not bad. You can just about see this. So what you're seeing here is this is the surprising one. Is these new clean technologies are beating commodities on costs. Solar's the big one. Since that Democrat president, why have I forgotten his name? The guy's 99. He's still alive.
How good?
Not Clinton. No. Carter, thank you. Jimmy Carter, bless him. Since Jimmy Carter put solar on the rooftop of the White House, it was Jimmy Carter that said we were going to have the solar revolution. The price of solar has fallen by 99.7% since Jimmy Carter put solar on the roofs of the White House. And it's now the cheapest form of energy. And when you add in battery storage, which we now have in an invincible combination, battery storage plus wind is the cheapest source now and getting cheaper than natural gas. And the problem with your bills, when you get your bill, you can't split out the cost of renewable energy from the cost of your other energy. When you have another look at your bill, we need to do that because your bill, you're charged the highest marginal cost on, and it's on gas sets the price for your heating. So when the price of gas goes up, the renewable energy companies have to charge if they're selling these other services. And this artificially inflates your energy price. If you split your bill, so when the Ukraine war was peaking with gas was 6 times the cost of renewable energy, was that in your gas bill and your heating bill from there? It wasn't, was it? So fossils was 6 times more expensive than renewables. This is the secret in our system in the UK. We've not told people that renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy in the UK today. Most people think that renewables are subsidised. Of course, it's the other way round, and we've got to move by changing the bills so that the real price of renewables is on your bill. And this is something that a lot of people have been asking for. Next one, please. The other thing is these new technologies are beating on speed. This is how long it took to build nearly 3,000 terawatt-hours of nuclear. And this is how long it took to build nearly 2,000 terawatt-hours of gas. From the first gas, 35 years, and then there's coal. But look here for a minute. Look how quickly this has changed. It took the first 1,500 terawatt hours of solar took 12 years, it took 2017. But the last 8 years, the next 1,000 terawatt hours only took just 8 years. So we're putting huge amounts of clean energy onto the grid globally. And this is because, of course, these technologies, manufactured technologies, are faster. And the incumbents, whether you're talking utility companies or politicians, have underestimated the speed of this change. And they think in linear terms. We've got to think in exponential terms. Things happening really rapidly. And this is, again, that thing, the World Energy Outlook from the International Energy Agency thought that in 2020 we'd be here. And even in 2023, 2022, they thought we would be here. But look at the difference between 2022 and actually 2023. We're constantly underestimating the speed of these trends. And the same with electric vehicle. These are the estimates. This is the actual. And the same with battery cells. This is where we thought we would be even in 2021. We thought we'd be here. And then we're here. Because we learned how to make super fast, super cheap batteries, which is going to be one of the things that changes. I do these conferences with the oil and gas industry. So if any of you were any of you with Greta Thunberg outside the Intercontinental in Mayfair? Were you? Thank you. I had to walk in my suit and tie with everyone shouting, "Shame on you!" I didn't go through that. I got to say, I felt terrible by the time I got to the end of the walk of shame. I think the walk of shame, we had to walk in front of all the protesters. I think the police took great joy in that. Well, anyway, so I had to debate Exxon, Chevron, and Petronas versus me. I got to say, I didn't do a very good job because there was 400, 500 oil and gas executives. The person who did the best job is, have you anyone heard Greg Jackson speak, the founder of Octopus Renewables? He's got 8 million customers. An astonishing speaker. His opening stance was very clever. He said, the pledge to my customers in Scotland, where we're working with house builders, is they will never pay another energy bill again for the rest of their lives. That was his opening stance. Just think about that a minute. You're sitting there. This audience, mostly Middle Eastern kind of oil and gas people and American oil and gas people, they were looking around, they were looking at each other. This guy's saying that the consumer will never pay an energy bill again for the rest of their life. So how did he do it? He said they've got an electric vehicle, a cheap one from China, in the front of the gate. They've got an electric battery in their basement. They've got solar on the roof. And in the middle of the night, they're drawing the energy from the car. Or rather, they in the middle of the night, they're putting the energy into the car, and then during the day at peak pricing, they sell the energy that's stored in the house or stored in the car into the grid, and the house makes the energy, and then the Octopus makes their money, and that's why the household doesn't pay again for a bill. And he said, everyone is existing in the way of the internet. It took 2 hours to download a newspaper. So, 20 years ago, people said, it will never take off. And now we've got a mobile phone where you'll pay £50 a month and you can eat as much kind of mobile phone internet use as you possibly can for your £50 a month. And he said, energy is going to be like that. You're going to pay a flat fee, 50 quid a month, and you're going to have as much energy as you need. And that's the system that we're building today in the United Kingdom, and we're building it around the world. And he said, we're going to kill your business model, we're going to eat your lunch, and all of you're stuck like, the publishing printers and the people with the solid, landline phone. You're living in the past. We're building a new system, and you're still racing to catch up, and you'll never catch up. It was an amazing speech, and he was absolutely right, because that's the new system that we're building, and it's still being built in front of our eyes. Please. Wind generation, well, I'm going to say the same. These annualised growth of 28%. Can you imagine it? Fossil fuel system is growing slightly, but it's never grown more than 0.5% a year, 1% a year. The renewable energy system, look at the combined annual growth in batteries, and this is going to continue to grow. This is astonishing growth rates, and I know I'm a kind of a finance money thing. This is what investors are interested in. They're not interested in the business growing at 1%. They want to see businesses growing at 25%. Next, please. The world's added 510 last year gigawatts of renewable capacity in 23, equivalent to the entire power capacity of Germany, France and Spain combined in 1 year. In 1 year. And that capacity grew by 50% the year before. And by 2030, that's set to be 2.5 times higher by 2030. Not far off the COP goal of tripling. Now, there's another statistic that isn't in there, which is when COVID happened, we lost 5 million barrels of oil demand a day. There's 100 million barrels of oil demand a day. Do you remember the period when oil prices were negative? That's when all the share prices of the oil companies dropped because their production costs are what, $20, $30 a barrel? When oil's at $10 a barrel, I don't know if people know this, the oil companies were borrowing from the banks to pay their dividends. Dividends are normally paid from profits. Call me old-fashioned. But no, under the energy system we've got, the oil companies were borrowing from the banks to fund their dividends and their share buybacks. That's why the price of oil is so important. The International Energy Agency, at this speed of growth, reckons that within 5 years, we're going to see 5 million barrels of oil demand destroyed a day. Now, if that happens, again, oil prices could go down, and this is where you get negative returns on capital. The cost of capital for an oil company, raising their debt, raising equity, the cost of capital is too high to justify the projects they're doing. Right now, when oil's at $70, $80 a barrel, and you're getting out of the ground at $10 a barrel, of course you're going to do it. But if the oil price drops because demand drops, here's another secret of the industry. OPEC, the biggest cartel in the world today, we've had 8 oil production cuts in the last year and a half. We don't hear it on the news to try and keep oil prices high. Why are energy prices high? Because it's not a real market, it's an artificial market. That's what a cartel is. It keeps prices high for consumers. That's why we've got to get rid of the fossil fuel system, because it's controlled by a cartel of very few sellers and multiple buyers. And just to illustrate this point, some of you have probably got computers and printers at home. Does everyone have a printer? A few people have printers. Okay. When you're buying a printer, you're not really buying a printer. Printer is cheap, fairly cheap. What you're really buying is a constant need to buy printer ink. That's what you're buying, is a contract to buy printer ink. The fossil fuel system is the same. When you buy a car, you're buying a contract with BP to go back to the station every week or every other week, or in our case, every 3 months, because we don't really use our car. And it's a mixed hybrid one as well. So you're going back to buy, and it's a long-term. Now, can you imagine what would happen if you bought a printer where you never needed to buy printer ink? Everyone would buy it, wouldn't they? But you'll be driving the printer ink and the printer manufacturers out of business, because their follow-up business is selling. Hewlett-Packard writes to you to say you're running out of ink. Please buy your next printer. Oh, by the way, they're 20 quid each, and you need 4, and you probably need to replace them 2 or 3 times a year if you write and so on. So that's what's happening with the energy system. We're getting rid of the printer ink, the fuel, and we're creating a new system, which is why the energy system is going to halve in size, because we're not going to need motorway, roads, stations selling us oil. We're not going to need petrol stations at the end of the street. We're not going to need. Half the world's shipping is LNG and tankers carrying oil and gas from around the world. That's going to halve in size in this new energy system. And as we create our own energy, we're going to have thousands and thousands of producers with thousands and thousands of users, and this monopoly, this cartel, disappears in this new energy system. And instead of power concentrated in the hands of the Russians and the Saudis and the Americans, who control oil production and gas production, energy is going to be distributed around the world. The global south will get off of importing oil and gas, and people will get a fair pay energy fairly because of competition, and the price of energy will fall because of competition. And we will remove this artificial system. That's what we're building today. Those of you who have Optimus Renewables or have any EV. Sorry, next one. This looks at UK electricity from fossil fuels. That's total demand and fossil fuels. Look at how that's collapsed. Total demand has fallen. This is the thing that we forget. When you buy a new appliance, a new hairdryer, a new radio, a new TV, they're so much more energy efficient that the demand for energy in the UK has fallen. Our old devices we got rid of weren't efficient. Our washing machines. This has all changed because of regulation and law. And that's why energy demand's come down. But look at where renewables comes in. It comes in here and overtakes fossil fuels 3 or 4 years ago. That's what the Tories are defending by their desire to do more on the gas licenses. And here's the record fall in EU coal and gas generation. Pushed power sector emissions down 19%. This is coal generation down 26% in 23. Gas fell 15% last year. Emissions fell 19%. This is the good news that should be, what we're talking about in this election. Anyway. So, solar and batteries are taking over. And this is a forecast done by Bloomberg New Energy Finance and the International Energy Agency. This is where we expect solar to be within a year or so, overtaking coal and gas with the most installed total generation capacity. Doesn't mean it's on all the time, which is why we need battery storage, but that's why pumped hydro storage and battery storage is growing so fast to meet the times when the sun's not shining and wind isn't blowing. And we're poised to electrify the rest of the system. Heat pumps, EVs, electric vehicle trucks. I saw a picture of a Chinese electric container ship. We're electrifying global container ships as well. And then electrifying, of course, everyone has a digitally enabled automated device. It's called a phone. That's a battery system with electricity. Next, please. Everyone moans about China because, okay, they're building new coal, but it's super critical coal and retiring their old inefficient stuff. But they are installing more renewable power and capacity anywhere in the world. And this is how fast they're electrifying. It's China. So I was listening to a Radio 4 program back in April, and the list price of these new Chinese electric vehicles is $10,000 list price. So we could export them to the UK for what? Sell them in the street for $15,000. That's why, to protect UK manufacturing and European car manufacturing, we're going to put a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles because they're so cheap. And that's why Biden announced a 100% tariff. Chinese are making it so damn cheap. Look at what would happen if you were to sell Chinese electric vehicles for 4 people, $10,000, what's that, £8,000. Even if we got into the UK at £14,000, the average car down the street, if you bought one, is it £22,000? I've not bought a car recently, but this is what the Chinese have been doing. And I don't know whether they're friends or foes, but when it comes to electrifying transport and energy, they're miles ahead of the rest of the world. Come on. Thank you. So, some of you will have noticed the naysayers in the last 6 months. I know you're not Express readers, and I know you're not Daily Mail readers, and you're probably not even Telegraph readers. But if you were, or GB News, how many of you read GB? Anyway, so this is the kind of, I do read the Sunday Times, along with the Financial Times, and the Sunday Times comes out with this crap. Electric vehicles for everyone, it's an impossible dream. Are electric car enthusiasts a little bit too enthusiastic? And Tesla can build these are real headlines, by the way, all the cars it wants. The real challenge is going to be selling them. Power failure, automakers are all on electric cars, but US infrastructure is unprepared. As I tell everyone, when the first car went out the street, how many petrol stations were there across America when the first petrol car came out? And the answer, of course, is 0. They had to put a petrol car can in the back. And people say, oh, there's not enough electrification. Of course, it's all being built now, this infrastructure. 10 reasons electric cars still suck. We unplugged the EV hype. I think that was a Daily Mail one. And they've been running the same headline. What are they doing? They're defending a business model. These business elites are defending the you need fossil fuels business model because they're defending this amazing ability to concentrate wealth in the hands of a few oligarchs and a few powerful executives. That's what they're defending, and of course the Express is going to defend that. Whilst all these headlines are coming out, this is what was really happening. This growth. You've got to focus on the signal, not the noise. This is what was really happening. Exponential sales of electric vehicles. I think I've got the UK. No, it comes in a minute. So pessimists sound clever, but it's the optimists that change the world. And the incumbents have been predicting the end of the transition for decades, And the pessimist and optimist take on the solar and wind uptake. Solar and wind doesn't work. Solar and wind is too expensive. The grid can't handle solar and wind intermittency. Grids and permitting is going to stop grid growth. China dramatically reduces costs. Leaders raise the deployment ceiling. Batteries and digitization provide all these new solutions. This is the optimist reality that we're seeing around. Okay, this is the UK one. This is beginning to look like one of those S-curves of growth. This is what's actually happening. I've got two colleagues in the team working on the data. It's still going in this direction. We've gone from not talking about it at all to being nearly 20% of UK car sales being electric. And we could reach this crossover point somewhere by maybe 26, I don't know if it's going to be 25. And you can see the decline in internal combustion engine sales. So you're getting the point I'm making. Yeah, this is a quote from Richard Branson. 10 years from now, the smell of exhaust from cars will be a thing of the past, much like the smell of cigarettes in restaurants. And I think he's probably right. Thanks, well, on that. Okay, here's some conclusions. Thank you. That's okay. So, right. So, you may have debated this with other people, and it's thrown back in our face. We need gas for energy security, or we need fossil fuels for energy security. The most secure thing we can do, as you know, and I think you all agree, is to completely get rid of the fossil fuel system. That's the most secure thing that we'll do. And parts of the global south, like sub-Saharan Africa, are hugely abundant in renewable energy. So is obviously Australia, that still thinks that their future is based on coal. And most parts of the world have renewable energy, and the size of the resource is 100 times bigger than fossil fuels, and of course every single country in the world has them. And 80% of the world's population, thereabouts, live in energy importing countries and 20% in energy exporting countries, which is why the Americans in the South is incredibly wealthy and the rest of the world is not. And when people, you hear arguments saying, of course Africa's got the rights to develop, very few countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, like Nigeria, we could put in Mozambique and Angola, and then of course you've got Algeria and Libya. Most of those countries, very few countries produce oil and gas. Most of Sub-Saharan Africa imports their oil and gas from their neighbours. And so you've got very few people selling it. And then last time I looked at Nigeria, which has one of the biggest resources, not an egalitarian society, half its population is on poverty. Fossil fuels hasn't solved the poverty crisis. So these are arguments that we've all rehearsed multiple times. Again, next, please. So, we've got flashing red lights all over the fossil fuel system. A collapse in fossil fuel capacity additions, that's the key one in the last decade. Oil and gas capex has declined. They realise that they shouldn't be investing in more reserves, which is where my talk started. The sale of internal combustion engines has peaked and declined, and fossil fuel demand has kind of got a bit wavy, but is beginning to decline. And we think that the more batteries you put on, the lower the demand for fossil fuels. So, and the era of peaking fossil fuels is here. It peaked in industry, we think, a few years ago. In buildings, it certainly peaked. Power and heat, it's peaked. And transport, we think, is at the point of peaking. At the point of peaking, decline happens. And that's what investors look for. So I think there's no doubt about it. I think the faster we build this global clean energy system, the cheaper energy gets for consumers, and the faster we can kill demand for fossil fuels. Now, if you don't believe me, have some of you seen this one before? Have you seen? You know what you're looking at. You're looking at the Easter Parade in 1990. These are all horse and tracks and pony and carts. Where's the car? There's a car in there. You can't quite see it. It's down the back somewhere. There's a car. I forget exactly where it is. But within 13 years, where's the horse? And there is a horse in there, I think. Where is the horse? I did spot it. There is a horse in there. So Ford's nominal price fell by 61% in 13 years. And the market flipped really fast. And so the point really of this is that transitions, next one please, transitions happen really quickly. Now, everyone's seen this one before. Remember these adverts you used to get in the freebie newspapers? Every single device that is here, every single device, your cine camera, your kind of computer, your recording device, your disc where you put your little disc to listen to your music, your radio, your phone, your earphone, all of these now appear on one device, which of course is your smartphone. That's all happened probably within the time of many of you in this room. So, as an investor, you have to ask yourself the question: why didn't Kodak become the digital camera maker, and why did Blockbuster become Netflix? Why didn't they become Netflix? And why did Peabody Coal not become a big renewable energy company? That one down there, the train, is a company called Baldwin Locomotives. You can look it up, actually. Their chairman was listed in the New York Stock Exchange. The chairman was asked in 1920, I think it was, why are you still investing with the rise of the car in the next generation of locomotive steam engine? And the chairman said, mark my words, steam locomotives will be the dominant form of transport well into the 1980s. That's what he said. And this is the kind of language that you're getting from each of these companies. We're growing, you need us more, we'll never get off of fossil fuels, you'll only ever be able to move from A to B if you burn something in a fuel, in an internal combustion engine. And I think this is what investors are concerned about, that when history will repeat itself, these are the laggards of the past. So, I'll just go back one. I'm going to finish my talk there. I have no idea how many minutes I talked for, Caroline.
Okay. 45?
Did I? Oh, it's longer than I said I would. But okay, so what does this mean for you? So I think at the beginning, I kind of asked a motivational question right at the beginning. Well, what's motivating you? And if you're an investor, I think the key thing is to find an investment club of people that want to invest ethically, pick companies that form part of this sustainable future. Don't make the mistake of thinking that because oil has been an amazing business model, a renewable energy company with very low margins is going to be the same. They're not. It's a different business model completely. So please don't think running into wind is the same thing as running into oil and gas. It's a totally different business model. Because we're going through an energy revolution. It's difficult to work out what it means, but what I do know is if you're a protester, either out on the street or you're a protester through who you write to, or you join a group like ShareHolders,